I want to welcome to the stage our interim dean, Peter DiMarzo, who's also the John G. McDonald Professor of Finance, as well as serving the interim dean of the GSB. Thrilled to have him here, and he's also going to set up our closing keynote conversation. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dean DiMarzo.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Matt. Well, thanks everyone for being here. I just want to say this is a great event, and it's really a delight to be participating in the 25th anniversary of the Center for Social Innovation. What a great milestone. And you know, at least since the early 1970s, when Dean R.J. Miller launched a public management program, the GSB has been committed to developing innovative, principled, insightful leaders who can lead across business, government, and society. And as we are entering our centennial year, our commitment to changing lives, changing organizations, and changing the world is as strong as ever. So many of the difficult problems that we face today are really fundamental challenges of leadership and stewardship. We need more people with the skills and insight to guide and lead organizations and institutions to implement positive change in the world. It's therefore fitting that our final keynote conversation will be with two alumni who are outstanding examples of the change agents that this school develops. So it's my pleasure to introduce our facilitator for the keynote, Jenna Nicholas. Jenna has 2 degrees from Stanford, an undergraduate in international relations and later MBA at the GSB 2017, and she has made a powerful impact on the world of social and environmental change. She's co-founder and CEO of Impact Experience, an organization dedicated to addressing structural inequity and racial injustice through innovative partnerships and experiential learning. Jen is also vice president of One Planet VC, where she invests in early-stage businesses across transformative industries such as education technology, marketplaces, media, and the future of mobility. Her impact journey includes founding Phoenix Global Impact, where she advanced initiatives like Divest Invest Philanthropy to help foundations move away from fossil fuel investments and into sustainable solutions. And Jenna's work has been widely recognized both here at Stanford and beyond. She received the Stanford Impact Founder Fellowship. She earned the Echoing Green Fellowship. She has a place on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for social entrepreneurship. She's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So Jenna, thank you for your dedication to the Stanford community and the broader impact space. We're thrilled to have you lead this conversation.
It is my esteemed privilege to introduce a dear friend and collaborator, Miriam Rivera. Miriam has not 1 but 4 degrees from Stanford. Her undergrad, master's, MBA, law degree, and has been a pioneer within the venture capital industry as the co-founder and CEO of Ulu Ventures, doing incredible work investing in diverse entrepreneurs. Prior to founding Ulu, had an incredible career in the legal system as the deputy, I'm going to get this right, the vice president, deputy general counsel at Google, leading Google through its IPO process and building one of the most diverse teams at Google. Miriam has also served on the board of trustees here at Stanford, on the board of Sesame Street, as well as Acumen America, doing incredible work in the social entrepreneurship space, and is really dedicated to supporting education, particularly with underserved communities, and has formed a scholarship fund, and just an incredible individual. So I'm really excited for you all to have an opportunity to hear more from Miriam today. And would love to start off our conversation, Miriam, just asking you a bit about your journey in coming out of the business school and your law degree here, and sort of why you do what you do.
So one thing I will say is that when I started at the GSB, I came from the not-for-profit sector, so you'll see a lot of the same kinds of interests, just having been transplanted into the for-profit sector. I had really, apart from like working like at McDonald's or Brown's Chicken or a pizzeria, like had very limited experience in the for-profit sector. But it was actually also very influential. I would say that when I left the JD MBA program, I did a lot of what most people do that graduate at that time. I was kind of re-careering, so I first went to a major law firm. I worked in the venture capital and startup practice. Then I went to Accenture, and I worked in traditional strategic management consulting before actually becoming a startup founder. So in the late 90s, I was a startup founder along with 4 people from Stanford Engineering School, and I was kind of the jack of all trades as a JD MBA, and had my first experience helping to raise angel capital, and then we raised traditional venture capital, and I worked there until the Series B, when I had a child who happens to be in the audience, Miriam Rivera. And I was asked to leave my startup, in part because they didn't want a husband-wife team, but I don't think they really wanted a working mother. So I was told that if it were my board director's grandchild, he would prefer the mother to stay home, which was not something I had any intention of doing because I had borrowed a lot of money to go to the JD MBA program and I needed to work. So that was kind of the beginning of my career in venture. It wasn't quite an auspicious beginning, but I went to work at a tech company in Silicon Valley where I worked for a first-generation college, first-generation American Latinx public company general counsel. So he was like the unicorn I didn't even know existed. And then from him, I developed, the playbook that I took to Google ultimately, where I became the first VP and Deputy General Counsel for the company. I had a really wonderful time there. Like when I joined, it was 160 people. We took it to about $10 billion in 5 years, and I grew my team from being the second person to being about 160 people worldwide. It was probably the most diverse team at Google. We had about 50% women, when even the California bar was only about a third women. We had about 39% people of color, when the bar probably had something like 16%. And I think it was really the attraction for those people within our profession of working for a team where the general counsel was African American, the deputy general counsel was a Latina woman, and then our next most senior person, who actually been the first person in the department, was Indian son of immigrants, right? And so people came because they thought, like, what the hell's going on over there? And that was really not the, for me, I realized that there was a really long linkage around diversity. My family's from Puerto Rico. Historically, I learned from one of my younger daughter that we're part, like a quarter indigenous, part descendant of slaves. I knew that part. And then also, obviously, part European. And so we had diversity just built in, and we were all kind of colors in our 5 children and 2 parents. And so that part had always been a part of who I was. But I grew up in a predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood. I was Spanish speaking first. Then I really started to go to school, learn English, watch Sesame Street. We were allowed to watch as much Sesame Street as we could possibly handle so we could learn English. And then through that, I feel like the theme of diversity and how important it was to me kind of came into my life. I went to a middle school that happened to have a gifted program, and it was very diverse. This school had 60 different languages spoken at home. And even though I had grown up in a predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood, I had not really felt like, you kind of feel sometimes as an immigrant that you might be like 1 foot in and 1 foot out of your traditional culture. And certainly some of the kinds of belief systems that my parents had around sexism were not ones that I wanted to embrace, and that did have an impact on me. So when I went into a broader environment, I actually felt for the first time I'm at home. And I also see the richness of this as America and like what we're all bringing to this party. And that's been a part of the affinity around diversity since I was a teenager, and then also over time it became really clear to me that this was part of the business case around why diversity needed to exist and why we actually were, as a country, one of the most productive economic societies, and that we were able to do business around the world, that we were able to, at Google, do business faster than most people, because like even in our legal team, we would try to bring people, if we're doing business in Japan, we'll have a lawyer who speaks, read and write Japanese, cultural affinity as well, had lived there, had traveled there. And so, same in Latin America and Europe, it kind of makes sense, right? That you would actually be able to do business more quickly if you're doing it in the native language. And you might have to paper in English, but you really can make connections in ways that I think were making it faster for us to grow our business.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that incredible journey. And just to double click on that last part there, as you think about how you approach venture investing as a Latina in tech and the venture capital industry, can you share how it shapes how you think about investing?
Yes, so one of the things that we try to talk about, and I remember at the business school they used to use the word inclusive, which meant that we would incorporate like women and or people of color, but we were still predominantly, a very traditional community in so many ways. But what we try to do at ULU is to really have teams that are diverse, and meaning they usually have some amount of representation from women, people of color, immigrants, and mainstream white people. And I think that is something that we know from a lot of the research is actually generating more financial results for companies, but it's something that most people don't think of as a potential way to create a social impact. Venture capital, probably only 1% of companies actually ever raise venture capital in the US, but they represent the source for about 40+% of public companies, and sometimes even more. So like, if we can change who starts a company, we know it changes who gets hired, we know it changes who gets equity, we know it changes who gets wealth in this country. In addition, 40% of the dollars that are invested in firms like ULU and other asset managers comes from diverse people, but only 1.4% of those dollars ever makes it into financial managers that are diverse themselves. And so really we've taken a wealth transfer from 40% of the dollar creators and moved it outside of their communities. They're also not solving problems that impact those communities. So I see venture as a really strategic instrument to help create change in our economy and to help change the wealth gap, as well as giving opportunity to more people in a society that has become incredibly more diverse and much more educated, but that are really underrepresented in terms of who has access to capital in this country.
Amazing. And going back to your experiences at Google, you mentioned this briefly, but you built one of the most diverse teams at Google. How did you go about doing that? What was it like when you were working there?
Well, I think this was funny because one time I got a call from a former colleague from my prior legal department who worked for LinkedIn Legal, and he asked me, how was I finding all of these people that were diverse? And I kind of laughed because I looked at 5,000 LinkedIn resumes to build a team of about 160 people, interviewed about 500 people. And on top of it, my sense is that our own team, starting with diverse people, attracted diverse people, and also we had diverse networks. Like, I belong to Hispanic Bar Association, Women in the Bar, things that would also create relationships with people that were from diverse communities. And so in so many ways, it wasn't even something, like, we certainly cared about it, but it wasn't something that was taking, I think, an unusual level of effort because we already had relationships with a lot of diverse sources of counsel, and certainly that helped us to do it. But it really goes to the point that a lot of the times opportunity is in plain sight. These folks had a database that included probably every diverse attorney in the country, but they weren't even using their own tools to actually identify diverse people, and they didn't have social connections otherwise to those communities. So my sense is that's what we're doing every day. We do it in business, we do it in the law, we do it in venture, and part of what we're trying to do is increase our own aperture by having diverse teams in our firm, as well as belonging to diverse communities in venture capital, like Black VC or Somos VC, or participating in All Raise or other organizations where these people exist and we build relationships with them.
Thank you. And we have a number of students in the audience who are really looking to pursue careers at the intersection of business and social impact. What advice would you have for them?
So what I'd say is, when I first graduated, I had to pay off $130,000 worth of loans, and I was first generation college. It was really a necessity for me to work in a job that would actually pay enough, and plus I was helping to support my mother, supported my mother for 28 years, okay? So sometimes you may not have the luxury of doing something that is could be highly impactful but is low paying. So trying to find that intersection between could get paid and is impactful was for me actually a really important distinction that I tried to make. And at times it meant that I was doing something in the not-for-profit sector always as part of my social commitment. I might be serving on the board of a domestic abuse shelter for women and kids. I might be serving on the board of my church. I was doing something always while I was working on, being a lawyer, being a startup founder. And so part of it is realizing that over time, you will still build a skill set that is valuable and helps you to contribute in a variety of sectors. So part of the work that I do with Acumen Fund America, which is an impact venture capital firm that takes philanthropic capital and puts it into for-profit technology-oriented companies that impact low-income Americans, is I help them to kind of develop their investing process. I was part of their investment committee for 5 years. I serve on the board now. And part of it was helping them understand, what do traditional venture people do? How is what we're going to do different from that? How will it be the same? So that they could apply rigorous decision making to their investment decisions, but they also made choices to be impact driven first, and to try to be impactful in terms of maybe areas where traditional venture would not be an early adopter investor. And so I think that, for me, it's been a continuum between the work that I do at ULU, which is definitely oriented at traditional venture capital type of returns. But even our portfolio, I think, has about 50% companies that could be considered impact-oriented companies because they're either in education, there might be an environment impact, there may be some financial inclusion impact, even access to justice. There have been a lot of different themes in our portfolio as a generalist firm. And so, but we're trying to identify the ones that have real opportunity to create billion-dollar revenue companies in some sort of reasonable period of time from 10 to 20 years, right? So I think that you can do both. You might not be able to do them simultaneously at the same extent that you might want to, but you can build, your skills that you're building in the for-profit sector are often very influential for not-for-profit organizations as well, and that's been part of what I've felt has been impactful for places like Sesame Street, which is the first not-for-profit I've ever been involved in that actually has EBITDA, and maybe one of the few that has kind of linked its intellectual property as a mechanism to self-fund that has been sustainable for 50 years.
Oh, that's great. We had a chance earlier also to hear from Jenny from Free Will, which is one of the Ulu portfolio companies, and a great example of exactly what you're talking about. Another role that you've played in the ecosystem is as the co-founder of Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs, and I was hoping that you might just share a little bit about what that is and sort of the role you see it playing in the ecosystem.
So Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs is now the largest alumni association at Stanford. We have chapters here in Silicon Valley, and then independently there are chapters in India, the UK, there's 2 in Texas, there's 2 in Southern California, there's 1 in New York. So they have, just like any other kind of Stanford interest group, people have started their own chapters in a variety of regions around the world. But what we did initially was to try to create a system of networking for people who are interested in startups, who are interested also, there's a lot of work on the impact side. I know, Jenna, you have been very involved along with one of our vice presidents in that space of trying to help social entrepreneurs and for-profit entrepreneurs to be able to access expertise from within the alumni population at Stanford, as well as at different points, capital too. There are definitely like pitch sessions related to technology companies. There are definitely events for social entrepreneurs to interact with potential investor supporters. So it has, I think, blossomed now to over 3,000 members in Silicon Valley and many more around the world.
You referenced earlier, a key part of the thesis at Ulu is around investing in diverse entrepreneurs and sort of the sort of competitive advantage through doing that. Can you share a bit more for the companies that are wanting to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion within their organizations? How can they go about doing that? What advice would you have for them about why that's important and how that can be achieved?
Well, I think it's important to try to bring it into your organization. Hopefully not in a way that, I had one of my mentees who wrote an article of like, I'm done being the only. It is very lonely to be the only person of color, or to be supposedly representing like all people of color, all genders. It's not something that should be expected of anyone. Also, to be doing all the work related to diversity, and no one else in the organization is tasked to do that, and it's not paid for either. So there's a lot of things that I think we need to implement in order for diversity to both feel like it's being embraced and that it's actually valued. And my sense is that it is important to actually expose yourself. Like when Maggie Neal, who was here for many years, I went to one of her workshops on women on boards, and it was so eye-opening for me because she was the first person that said, diversity is hard. And I thought, like, my husband, who's white, and I just were kind of somehow getting it wrong. But it was so interesting to learn from her how the frameworks that were coming into our daily life, our work lives, are so different, and that really we have to be very gentle with each other in that there is no reason for someone to know something that they have not been exposed to. There is so much to learn. It can be so hurtful to be in environments where our frameworks are unfamiliar to one another, and there's a lot of personal work and learning that I think we all need to do when we're in diverse communities. And obviously diverse people are also in diverse communities of others that might speak other languages, or that may have different class backgrounds, or that may have different gender orientation or sexual orientation. And so like, it's not that any one of us actually can like navigate that world easily, and we shouldn't expect it to be easy. I think we should expect it to be a real growth opportunity, And we know that those growth opportunities tend to make organizations that can embrace diversity actually much more productive, because we don't share those frameworks. We actually have to do more work, and we do better work.
Thank you. So AI has been coming up in probably every session that we've had today, but as you think about sort of some of the key trends in the social innovation space over the next 5 to 10 years, whether it's AI or other key themes, what do you see as being on the horizon?
I do think that there's, I have sometimes equal part tremendous fear and tremendous optimism about AI. So I have been in environments where I do feel that in technology, there's always been a eugenic strain in Silicon Valley, right? It's been part since the 1930s. First semiconductor companies that were founded here started a sperm bank to try to improve the human race. There's a sense that people who are more intelligent than others may be better human beings than others, and maybe more worthy people than others. And that is coming out, I think, very clearly in some of the AI conversations that I hear. And that basically there would be many folks who'd be happy if 7 billion people kind of disappeared off the planet because they don't find them to be useful, and they don't necessarily see them as having innate value. So that's a level that is absolutely frightening to me, and that I have just been kind of shocked to see rising in Silicon Valley. When you think about Hitler got a lot of his belief systems from the United States. It wasn't like the opposite. We have a real history of oppression where we have really devalued particular kinds of human beings, and we have to be really careful in, I think, technology when we're talking about efficiency and how it's going to impact particular people. So that's one side of it. On the other side, I really see some real potential for optimism in many ways, because there's so much that can't be done because we can't drive the price of technology low enough to actually serve the needs of many so-called laggard industries. I think, for example, in education technologies, there's a lot of people that are trying to do free, but technology has typically not been the place that has been able to increase efficiencies in those areas, and so we do see technology providing leverage. One of our companies is called Zoom Transportation Services. They help to rationalize transportation for schools by having different kinds of vehicles, so we're not spending the same amount on ginormous buses, and we're not, almost 90% of the buses are diesel fuel. They're trying to electrify these systems. So we're trying to, this is the second largest cost center in education apart from teaching and staff. We're also trying to, it's also a big polluter, and in addition, it's the single largest transportation system in our country, so it has a lot of potential impact in terms of environment, because there are about 1 billion rides per month done for school kids in the United States alone, right? More than buses, planes, trains. So we see the opportunity for technology to be quite leveraged, and AI to provide better, like when we think about some of the work that nurses are doing that is burning them out, it is a lot of trying to actually manage what happens on a floor with changing patients that are moving every day without a lot of good technology to support that. And we do see AI applications that may really change their daily life, and may actually also provide data that helps improve care for patients. So we're excited about some of the applications that we're seeing, but we're also, I'm kind of wary at a high level. I also went to a discussion by diverse people about AI, and a lot of them were saying that in the boardroom, they're not asking questions about the ethics of AI, or they're not asking questions about the fact that these systems are being demonstrated right here at Stanford to actually embed bias. So like if you want to ask an AI, how much should I spend on a car, if the car is being sold by a person whose name is obviously a woman or a person of color, you will get a much lower price that you should bid on that car. And I'm shocked when I hear even people of color and women saying they're not asking about this because they're concerned about accuracy, but they don't see the bias as part of inaccurate information. So lots of good and lots of bad.
Thank you for sharing that. It's such an important part of the conversation. So today, as we all know, we're celebrating the 25-year anniversary of the Center for Social Innovation. Given the broader context that we're all operating in, how do you think the Center for Social Innovation can evolve to be responsive to the broader societal needs of the time that we're living in right now?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Sort of advice that you have for the Center for Social Innovation in this moment.
I think we're going through this is going to be another big wave of change in society because technology is moving so quickly. When I graduated in '95 from the JD MBA program, I worked on one of the first generation internet IPOs, and there were 39 million users in the entire world on the internet. There are over 5 billion today. There were 1 billion that came onto Google while I was there in a 5-year period, and Facebook too at that same time. So there's been drastic change in the world. Previously, the only organizations that had ever reached 1 billion users were religions, right? And so this is really shaping how people interact. It really changes our everyday lives. And I do think AI will kind of accelerate that. Technology can be so transformative, and I'm really an advocate because I see it for me, when I worked at Google, our mission was to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. I felt like this is about as not-for-profit-y mission as you can get, but you can also make a lot of money doing it, so it felt pretty good. And I do believe that there have never been the storehouses of knowledge, when you bring the world's information that was literally trapped in libraries and archives, and that was stuck behind government desks that tried to prevent people like me from accessing my rights and information. It felt like I was liberating a lot of people and making that available 24/7. And at the same time, I realized we were not so smart about how our kids even watch technology and how much access we gave them to devices when they were really young, because we didn't really appreciate, yes, they really do get into things that you don't want your kid looking at. So I think we're always just going to have to be watchful of what the trends are with technology, the division and the amount for propaganda to be created through AI, and the ability to target so specifically to particular categories of people is really changing the reality in which people live every day. That is highly dangerous, and I really think that we're also dehumanizing people to a certain extent. One of the great technologies to me was when Instacart came on. I was a working mother. I used to spend a lot of time trying to get groceries, make dinner. And I remember one time my delivery was coming, and I waved outside and I said thank you to the driver, and my younger daughter, not my one that's here, said, "Oh, you don't have to thank them." And I was so shocked. That was not the kind of that was not how I was raising her, but that was the kind of message she was getting about how humans and technology intersected each other. So I think we really have to be super cautious about that and try to maintain a level of humanism and humanity in terms of how we think about people and how we're going to change society with technology.
Thank you. So you've dedicated a lot of time to Stanford over the years in the form of service, particularly serving on the board of trustees here. Can you share what inspired you to dedicate that time to Stanford?
Well, I would say that somebody once told me that you can do almost anything through Stanford, meaning through the giving that we have here through our time, we're literally touching people like those in this room that are going to go on and do some of the most amazing things possible. And I believe that. You know, I'm shocked and impressed so much by how many different ways people who teach at Stanford, people who work at Stanford, people who study at Stanford, what their level and breadth of interests are, and how much this environment foments a culture of wanting to have an impact in different spheres of the world, whether it be the arts, technology, social change. And so I do think that my time here has such leverage in terms of having an impact outside in the greater world.
That's great. You mentioned briefly earlier about Sesame Street and the role it's played in your life and your service there. Can you share a bit more about the role it's played in your life and how it's inspired so many others?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we watched a lot of TV when we were little, probably not the best thing either, but like we had 5 kids and my mother was raising us alone a lot of the time. So I think we watched too much TV, but Sesame Street was one thing where we got kind of a pass. Like we got to watch as much Sesame Street as possible because my mother spoke English, but with a pretty strong Spanish accent. And like us learning how to count, do our letters, colors, even a lot of the representation in Sesame Street, I don't know if people remember, but like 50 years ago, there were Latinos, Blacks, Asians, and whites all living on the same street. That wasn't even true, right? But it was this ideal world where a lot of people were really intersecting one another and learning how to deal with feelings and learning how to interact with one another. And I feel like I got a lot of education through that has been really important, and that I think to this day, Sesame Street continues to provide a level of relevance in terms of education. And in fact, like, now we work with organizations like the International Refugee Committee that helps to bring education on digital phones for kids in refugee camps. And they work with NYU and they demonstrate that they do get kids kindergarten ready in refugee camp environments with people's mobile phones. And they have been in places like Syria and the Ukraine and other countries around the world. And so that work has kind of continued in terms of its global impact. And I'm really proud of that work that they're doing.
You shared a little bit earlier about your approach at Ulu. One of the key distinguishing parts of how you approach your investing, I know, is your decision-making framework. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about what that looks like and sort of how you think about investing.
So we use a framework that was developed here at Stanford University by Professor Ron Howard, who has unfortunately passed recently in October. He was a faculty member here for 53 years, so he also has a huge number of graduate students. And my husband and also the co-founder of Ulu along with me, Clint Corver, and also the co-founder of our startup and the father of my daughter, Serena. He is a PhD in decision and risk analysis. And part of what they learn in decision analysis is trying to reduce cognitive risks that impact our ability to make good decisions. And a lot of the most famous people in decision making, like Kahneman and Tversky, that some of them who were here at Stanford as well before, like descriptively say how bad we are at making decisions. And decision analysis is actually trying to counter all of those ways in which we're bad at making decisions. And we use it to help reduce bias in our own decision making about diverse teams. Like, even Stanford kids are so trained to talk about like the big stories so much that you have to actually deal with the bias that they have, that everything's going to work out, that they're going to all be able to make billion-dollar companies. So we're also actively trying to challenge ourselves by doing ground-up analysis as opposed to top-down analysis where overconfidence can really impact our decisions and make us, make poor decisions. So we use it for both trying to reduce our biases around entrepreneurs, about the financial opportunity as well, and to try to make predictions. And a lot of us studied trees here at the GSB, but Ron Howard, I think, took it to a next level because he embedded it more in the form of a conversation that could generate a model that could then be vetted and tested and the assumptions shared so that you could challenge the thinking of an organization. And so that's what we use as our methodology at ULU, and I think it's been really impactful. So in our portfolio, our top performing companies in our funds are diverse. Like they are 5 women led companies that are among our unicorns. There are 45% of the teams have an immigrant, 20% of them have an underrepresented founder. So we're seeing a reflection of the representation in higher education and tech that is much more aligned with what the reality looks like out there and what the US population looks like.
Oh, that's amazing. I've always been, we've known each other for about 15 years now, and I've always been so inspired by your perseverance and resilience and your vision. And I was wondering if you could just share with us what inspires you and kind of what keeps you going.
Well, I came to hear the previous panel because I need inspiration and hope like anyone else. And I do think that the work that a lot of folks are doing in this intersection between like technology, business, and also social impact is some of the most inspiring work that I get to be a part of. I also particularly love your husband, Darren Dodson, who has been someone with whom I've worked for pretty much all of our institutional funds. And his level of optimism is so important to me because when I feel discouraged, I feel like I'm in a community with people that, like Brian Stevenson, to whom you've basically been a person, both of you have introduced me to his work in Montgomery, Alabama. Personally, I have felt that it has, like when he talks about like hope is kind of like a muscle and you have to keep working it. It's a practice. It's not like Pollyanna. It's not like without it, I think we dry up and we shrivel and we lose our creativity. So for me, I come to events and I try to surround myself with people that have that sense of optimism and idealism, but also, they work their asses off. They actually get shit done. They don't do this work. This is not work that's for the faint of heart. You must overcome a lot every day to do it. And I feel privileged to be in a community of people, both at Stanford and at ULU and in venture capital of kind of believers, if you will.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're coming up to the end of our time together. But any sort of final words of wisdom, reflection that you'd like to offer today?
I think this has been a particularly challenging period for a lot of folks. I know that, I was trying to quote Brian Stevenson the day after, and I had people like, not yet, I'm not ready for that right now, the day after the election. But I really do think that, we have to really decide where we're going to focus our attention. And a lot of the times, it's not like I don't read the papers. It's not like I don't watch the news, actually. I get too much visual information is not good for me. But, I'll read the papers and I'll read the news. But I try to choose what I'm going to focus my attention on. And I'm really focusing my attention where I can actually make some positive difference for people, in technology. I really see my commitment as super important to continue and to understand that we are going to go through a lot of things, like the day that they had the new head of the immigration services come on, and he was on the radio saying, like, you know, you illegals had better watch out because you're getting kicked out. Like, I was going for a run. I put my ID in my pocket, right? Like, I'm practical. I'm not going to go out without an ID as a person that looks like me. I hope to be able to speak English well enough that I can pass when I pass the test. I expect to be in environments that will be more hostile. And I will work on creating environments that are conducive to building hope and to staying in community with people who are focused on positive ends.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Miriam, for all of your incredible work.